I'm the Nordic director for Tesla Motors, and I'm very excited to be here today to speak to you. I get to speak about something that I really, really love, and something that I fundamentally believe will change the world that we live in. I work for a company whose express purpose is to change the world. In fact, to underline our commitment to this, we've actually inscribed it into our mission statement. To accelerate the world transition towards a sustainable transportation. So how are we going to do this? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you about. I'll start by presenting the company as such, but I'll also talk to you why I believe this is the future. It's my hope that this talk and this presentation will in some way inspire some of you to think differently about electric cars and about how we treat our planet and how we can, in common responsibility, become more sustainable. Great ideas generally come from gifted individuals who are driven by passion. However, making such ideas come to life often takes the dedication of many. The best ingredients don't automatically make for the best cake. A very clear example of this is actually Nikola Tesla, who was arguably one of the most important scientists of all time, yet many of you probably haven't heard of it. He was very gifted. You've probably heard of the alternating currents. That's the electricity that runs everything in here. You've heard of neon lights. You've heard of X-rays. You've heard of the radio, the electric motor, lasers. Tons of things that were invented by Nikola Tesla. Unfortunately, he died alone, completely impoverished in a little tiny hotel room in New York in 1943. So being passionate is not really enough. So what is the recipe for success, and where do we find the right ingredients? Well, for Tesla Motors, the right ingredients has been a visionary leader, visionary CEO in the form of Elon Musk, and combine this with a lot of mad scientists and great people who work in a world where the 24-hour clock is just a concept in a different dimension, and where failing is just not an option. And where do I fit into this? Well, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for some of my failures early in life. In fact, 10 years ago, I went bankrupt with a company, and after that ordeal, I just wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something different and meaningful with my life. And I saw my opportunity in the electric world of EVs, electrical vehicles. And more precisely, in this new startup company called Tesla. I was prepared to sacrifice everything for this opportunity. I mean, I recall when we were in Norway, I had one car to show the whole Norwegian nation and a tent. My office was in a cafe near the Holmenkollen ski jump, and things could look dire at times, but somehow we made it through. And now Scandinavia is the largest market outside of the US. In fact, we have almost got 10,000 electrical Teslas registered in Scandinavia, and that's in 4 or 5 years. So what do I talk about when I talk about, what do I mean when I talk about this acceleration of transitioning towards sustainable transportation? Well, perhaps a more apt sentence would be catalyzing a change in a very old industry. After more than 100 years of the internal combustion engine, better known as the petrol motor or petrol engine, the auto industry, as we know it, have come to a crossroad. They face significant challenges. The reliance on fossil fuels has raised environmental concerns, created dependencies amongst both the industrialized and the developing nations on imported oil, exposes consumers to volatile oil prices up and down all the time. In addition, the enormous legacy of investments made by the auto industry has to date inhibited the innovation of alternative fuel powertrain technologies. At Tesla, we believe that these challenges offer a historic opportunity for companies that are unencumbered by the legacy of the oil industries. Most people will agree that if we continuously keep burning and removing natural resources and don't replenish them, then we will run out. And we will also destabilize our planet while doing so. At Tesla, we recognize this as being a severe and potentially cataclysmic problem that we, as a human race, have the responsibility to deal with now. So, the father of our modern-day car, Henry Ford, the man behind the first mass production car, the Model T, owed his success to simplicity. In fact, so simple, it used to say that you could choose any color you wanted as long as it was black. Well, at Tesla, we have a slightly broader range of options, but as this next slide will reveal, we do like to keep things simple. And that's why I brought this. This is the exact motor that comes and drives our cars as you see them. This is it. This produces 400 brake horsepower. No more. It's very simple. It doesn't get any more simple. So we don't need to be engineers to understand that going from this and then moving on to where we were before, you can definitely make a difference. So, although the Model S and Tesla in general boasts an impressive 500 kilometers of range, and even though the average daily usage of the average driver is no more than about 70 kilometers, the limitations of some electrical vehicles has prompted a term called range anxiety. So to puncture this fear, Tesla has built this charging infrastructure using fast chargers, and we have placed these around the world. And these superchargers, as you see them here, are the most advanced technology for charging. One of the most exciting and game-changing features of our cars is without doubt the ability to continuously improve them by using wireless connectivity. From a smartphone, you can use it anywhere in the world, and you can actually check the car's range, its location, unlock it. You can turn on the cabin heater or the air conditioning. It doesn't matter where you are. You can just use it over the air. And it also makes life easier when you want to take a car in for service, because the car will send a remote diagnosis before it comes. Our cars are controlled by state-of-the-art software that can continuously be upgraded to perfect a car throughout its life. Your car will regularly ask for intervals whether it wants to be upgraded or not. We're currently on version 6.2 in our software upgrades, and in fact, like last week, we sent out an upgrade over the air, which was one of the many pallets of new features that we upgrade with. But this one upgraded the car from being able to do 210 kilometers an hour to do 250 kilometers an hour. All new Teslas are born with safety features such as these radars, cameras, ultrasonic sensors, and by using wireless connectivity, we've been able to activate these over the air. The cars that we produce today are fitted with hardware that to a large extent will enable these cars to become 90% autonomous within very few years. You don't have to change the car. We will just be able to upgrade the software wirelessly over the air. So think about this. Here's a car that is one of the safest vehicles on the road. It has stunning good looks. It fits 5 adults. You can actually have 2 more children in the back. Storage space, front and back. And it has the ability to constantly be upgraded and gets better with age. It accelerates like a bat out of hell, and you can drive across Europe for free. It sounds too good to be true, but ladies and gentlemen, this is the truth, and the future is here right now. So, the future holds a lot of exciting things for us. We have just introduced what we call the 70D, which is a medium-sized battery for the Model S. By doing that, we're reducing the cost of ownership. But for more sort of radical changes and newer things, the Model X, which will be the first world all-wheel drive SUV, will be introduced this autumn this year. After the Model X, we'll be taking the last step in the grand master plan that I unveiled earlier. The car that we refer to as the 3. Now, I don't have any photos of it here, but it's going to be quite a game changer because it's the one that's going to be a mass production vehicle. It will have the approximate range of the Model S, but it will only cost about half as much. We expect to bring that to market in 2017. Last year in Nevada, Tesla broke ground in a huge undertaking, the Gigafactory. When it opens in 2017, it will be the largest battery production facility in the world. And we will reduce the cost of lithium-ion batteries by at least 30%. This will enable us to slash production costs of the Model 3 that we just spoke about. But it will also make us be able to move into other areas. We're developing batteries for further use for home storage of energy. We're working on home batteries which consumers will be able to use both in their houses but also in businesses. The Gigafactory here will be projected to produce about 35 gigawatts every single year, which is actually equivalent to the full production of the whole world in 2013. So what I'd like to do is we're challenging, Tesla is challenging the rest of the automotive industry to follow our lead, follow our suit. We have opened up all of our patents. We've got over 300 patents that all are enticing the other manufacturers to help gain more insight into what it takes to build an electrical car. That's how committed we are. We want everybody to follow our lead. Now try and indulge me in this vision. So what is it with cars that's so special? I mean, for the first 100,000 years that we were around, people didn't need cars. Now everybody wants cars. The car is often regarded as a symbol of personal freedom. In the Western world, getting a driver's license is almost like a rite of passage to becoming an adult. In other places, it's the only way we can connect people in little places out in the sticks. And other places, the freedom that driving actually represents is subject to censorship. The problem, though, is that with all these cars, they emit a lot of CO2. In fact, they emit 8.5 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every single year. That 90% of all total global CO2 emissions come from burning of fossil fuel. So for the purpose of an analogy here, let's imagine for a moment a public pool. If one little boy pees somewhere in the corner, the water purifying system and the chlorine will actually take care of this incident pretty quickly. But if you have 50 or you have 100 little boys urinating in this pool, it will very quickly become contaminated. Granted, our planet is somewhat bigger than a public pool, but I'm sure you get the idea of where I'm going. So So consider the following. The annual production of cars is somewhere between 70 and 80 million cars a year. And now we have accumulated 1.4 billion motorized cars in the world. I repeat, 1.4 billion cars. That's almost the same as the entire population of Earth when we invented the car about 100 years ago. In fact, if we placed every single car bumper to bumper, we could reach the moon from here. So why don't we do something about this? I mean, we have the technology to shift from fossil fuels to sustainable energy today. What is it that's the hindrance? Well, the answer is very simple. It's money and it's politics. And politics is governed by money. We need to approach this much more pragmatically. 100 years ago, Henry Ford spoke about democratizing the automobile. He proclaimed that everybody will be able to afford one, everyone will have one. The horse will disappear from the highways and the automobile will be taken for granted. Well, he was right, that's certainly the horses on the highways. But he was also right because the car has become a global common denominator, a universal language that every human can relate to somehow. But it also shapes and influences most people's lives in one way or another. If we really want to make a change and really want to effectuate a change in global human behavior towards a more sustainable future, we need to modernize the one thing that for over 100 years has been the symbol of the industrialized world, i.e. the car. The car has become the platform, the standard that forms most people's perception of the modern technology. We need to recalibrate this notion, and we need to use it for our own advantage by planting the seed for a sustainable revolution in every single car that we build moving forward. So what can you do? Well, you can promise me two things. You can promise me that whatever you do and whatever decision you make it sustainable. And the second thing, if you're ever fortunate enough to be buying a car, go electric. It will change your world and it will change everyone else's. Thank you.
save the state's last ancient redwood forest and blocking a proposed radioactive waste repository set for the desert. Shortly after I turned 30, I decided I wanted to dedicate a significant amount of my life to solving climate change. I was worried that global warming would end up destroying many of the natural environments that people had worked so hard to protect. I thought the technical solutions were pretty straightforward. Solar panels on every roof, electric car in the driveway, but the main obstacles were political. And so I helped to organize a coalition of the country's biggest labor unions and biggest environmental groups. Our proposal was for a $300 billion investment in renewables. And the idea was not only would we prevent climate change, but we would also create millions of new jobs in a very fast-growing high-tech sector. Our efforts really paid off in 2007 when then presidential candidate Barack Obama embraced our vision. And between 2009 and 2015, the U.S. invested $150 billion in renewables and other kinds of things. But right away, we started to encounter some problems. So first of all, the electricity from solar rooftops ends up costing about twice as much as the electricity from solar farms. And both solar farms and wind farms require covering a pretty significant amount of land with solar panels and wind turbines, and also building very big transmission lines to bring all that electricity from the countryside into the city. Both of those things were often very strongly resisted by local communities, as well as by conservation biologists who were concerned about the impacts on wild bird species and other animals. Now, there was a lot of other people working on technical solutions at the time. One of the big challenges, of course, is just the intermittency of solar. They only generate electricity about 10 to 30% of the time during most of the year. But some of the solutions that were being proposed were to convert hydroelectric dams into gigantic batteries. The idea was that when the sun was shining and the wind was blowing, you could pump the water uphill, store it for later, and then when you needed electricity, run it over to the grids. In terms of wildlife, some of these problems just didn't seem like a significant concern. So when I learned that house cats kill billions of birds every year, it put into perspective the hundreds of thousands of birds rather that are killed by wind turbines. It basically seemed to me at the time that most, if not all, of the problems of scaling up solar and wind could be solved through more technological innovation. But as the years went by, these problems persisted, and in many cases grew worse. So California as a state has really committed to renewable energy, but we still haven't converted many of our hydroelectric dams into big batteries. Some of the problems are just geographic. It's just you have to have a very particular kind of formation to be able to do that. And even in those cases, it's quite expensive to make those conversions. Other challenges are just that there's other uses for water, like irrigation. And maybe this is the most significant problem. It's just that in California, the water in our rivers and reservoirs is growing increasingly scarce and unreliable due to climate change. In terms of this issue of reliability, as a consequence of it, we've actually had to stop the electricity coming from the solar farms into the cities because there's just been too much of it at times. Or we've been starting to pay our neighboring states like Arizona to take that solar electricity. The alternative is to suffer from blowouts of the grid. And it turns out that when it comes to birds and cats, cats don't kill eagles. Eagles kill cats. What cats kill are the small, common sparrows and jays and robins, birds that are not endangered and not at risk of going extinct. What do kill eagles and other big birds like this kite, as well as owls and condors and other threatened and endangered species, are wind turbines. In fact, they're one of the most significant threats to those big bird species that we have. We just haven't been introducing the airspace with many other objects like we have wind turbines over the last several years. And in terms of solar, building a solar farm is a lot like building any other kind of farm. You have to clear the whole area of wildlife. So this is a picture of 1/3 of one of the biggest solar farms in California called Ivanpah. In order to build this, they had to clear the whole area of desert tortoises, literally pulling desert tortoises and their babies out of burrows, putting them on the back of pickup trucks and transporting them to captivity, where many of them ended up dying. And currently, the current estimates are that about 6,000 birds are killed every year, actually catching on fire above the solar farm and plunging to their deaths. over time, it gradually struck me that there was really no amount of technological innovation that was going to make the sun shine more regularly or wind blow more reliably. In fact, you could make solar panels cheaper, you could make wind turbines bigger, but sunlight and wind are just really dilute fuels. And in order to produce a significant amount of electricity, you just have to cover a very large landmass with it. In other words, all of the major problems with renewables aren't technical problems, they're natural. Well, dealing with all of this unreliability and the big environmental impacts obviously comes at a pretty high economic cost. We've been hearing a lot about how solar panels and wind turbines have come down in cost in recent years, but that cost has been significantly outweighed by just the challenges of integrating all of that unreliable power into the grid. Just take, for instance, what's happened in California. At the period in which solar panels have come down in price very significantly, same with wind, we've seen our electricity prices go up 5 times more than the rest of the country. And it's not unique to us. You can see the same phenomenon happen in Germany, which is really the world leader in solar wind technology. Their prices decreased 50% during their big renewable energy. Now, you might think, well, dealing with climate change is just going to require that we all pay more for energy. That's what I used to think. But consider the case of France. France actually gets twice as much of its electricity from clean, zero-emission sources than does Germany. And yet, France pays almost half as much for its electricity. How can that be? Well, you might have already anticipated the answer. France gets most of its electricity from nuclear power, about 75%. And nuclear just ends up being a lot more reliable, generating power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for about 90% of the year. We see this phenomenon show up at a global level. So, for example, there's been a natural experiment over the last 40 years, more than that, the deployment of nuclear and solar. You can see that at a little bit higher cost, we got about half as much electricity from solar and wind than we did from nuclear. Well, what does all this mean for going forward? I think one of the most significant findings to date is this one. Had Germany spent $580 billion on nuclear instead of renewables, it would already be getting 100% of its electricity from clean energy sources and all of its transportation energy. I think you might be wondering, and it's quite reasonable to ask, is nuclear power safe? And what do you do with the waste? Well, those are very reasonable questions. It turns out that there's been scientific studies on this going over 40 years. This is just the most recent study that was done by the prestigious British medical journal Lancet. It finds that nuclear power is the safest. It's easy to understand why. According to the World Health Organization, about 7 million people die annually from air pollution, and nuclear plants don't admit that. As a result, the climate scientist James Hansen looked at it and calculated that nuclear power has already saved almost 2 million lives to date. It turns out that even wind energy is more deadly than nuclear. This is a photograph taken of 2 maintenance workers in the Netherlands shortly before one of them fell to his death to avoid the fire, and the other one was in the flames. Now, what about environmental impact? Well, I think a really easy way to think about it is that uranium fuel, which is what we use to power nuclear plants, is just really energy dense. About the same amount of uranium as this Rubik's Cube can power all of the energy that you need in your entire life. As a consequence, you just don't need that much land in order to produce a significant amount of electricity. Here you can compare the solar farm I just described in Ivanpah to California's last nuclear plant, Diablo Canyon. It takes 450 times more land to generate the same amount of electricity as it does from nuclear. You would need 17 more solar farms like Ivanpah in order to generate the same output as Diablo Canyon, and of course it would then be unreliable. Well, what about the mining and the waste and the material? Well, this has been studied pretty closely as well, and it just turns out that solar panels require 17 times more materials than nuclear plants, in the form of cement, glass, concrete, steel, and that includes all of the reagents. The consequence is that what comes out at the end, since it's material throughput, is just not a lot of waste from nuclear. All of the waste from the Swiss nuclear program fits into this room. Nuclear waste is actually the only waste from electricity production that's safely contained and internalized. Every other way of making electricity emits that waste into the natural environment, either just going to be shipped to poor countries in Africa or Asia with the rest of our electronic waste stream to be disassembled, often exposing people to really high levels of toxic elements such as lead, cadmium, and chromium, elements that, because they're elements, their toxicity never declines over time. I think we have an intuitive sense that nuclear is a really powerful, strong energy source, and that sunlight is really dilute and diffuse and weak, which is why you have to spread solar collectors or wind collectors over such a large amount of land. Maybe that's why nobody was surprised when, in the recent science fiction remake of Blade Runner, the film opens in a very dark dystopian scene where California's deserts have been entirely paved with solar. All of which I think raises a really uncomfortable question. In the effort to try to save the climate, are we destroying the environment? Well, the interesting thing is that over the last several hundred years, human beings have actually been trying to move away from what you would consider matter-dense fuels towards energy-dense ones. That means really from wood and dung towards coal, oil, natural gas, uranium. This is a phenomenon that's been going on for a long time. Poor countries around the world are in the process still of moving away from wood and dung as their primary energies. And for the most part, this is a positive thing. As you stop using wood as your major source of fuel, it allows the forests to grow back and the wildlife to return. As you stop burning wood in your home, you no longer need to breathe that toxic smoke. And as you go from coal to natural gas and uranium as your main source of energy, it holds out the possibility of basically eliminating air pollution altogether. There's just this problem with nuclear. While it's been pretty popular to move from dirtier to cleaner energy sources, from energy diffuse to energy-dense sources, nuclear is just really unpopular for a bunch of historical reasons. And as a consequence, in the past, I and I think a lot of others have sort of said, well, in order to deal with climate change, we're just going to need all the different kinds of clean energy that we have. The problem is that just turns out not to be true. Remember I discussed France a little bit ago. France gets most of its electricity from nuclear. If France were to try to significantly scale up solar and wind, it would also have to significantly reduce how much electricity it gets from nuclear. That's because in order to handle the huge variability of solar and wind on the grid, they would need to burn more natural gas. Think of it this way, it's just really hard to ramp up and down a nuclear plant. Whereas I think we're all pretty familiar with turning the natural gas up and down on our stove. A similar process works in managing the grid. Of course, it goes without saying that oil and gas companies understand this pretty well, which is why we've seen them invest billions of dollars in recent years in promoting solar and wind. This just raises, I think, another challenging question, which is that in places that are using a lot of nuclear or have grids that are mostly nuclear and hydro, going towards solar and wind and other renewables would actually increase carbon emissions. I think a better alternative is just to tell the truth, and that's what a number of scientists have been doing. I mentioned earlier that hundreds of thousands of birds are killed every year by wind turbines. What I didn't mention is that 1 million bats at a minimum are killed every year by wind. The consequence has been that bad scientists have been speaking out about this. This particular bat species, the hoary bat, which is a migratory bat species, is literally at risk of going extinct right now because of the significant expansion of wind. It's not just wind, it's also on solar. The scientists who were involved in creating the Ivanpah solar farm, who were involved in clearing that land, have been speaking out. One of them wrote, "Everybody knows that translocation of desert tortoises doesn't work. When you're walking in front of a bulldozer crying and moving animals and cacti out of the way, it's hard to think that the project is a good idea." And now we can see these phenomena at work at an international level. In my home state of California, we've been stuffing a lot of natural gas into the side of the mountain in order to handle all that intermittent solar and wind. It sprung a leak, which is the equivalent to putting 500,000 cars on the road. And currently in Germany, there's protesters trying to block a new coal mining project that would involve destroying the ancient Kullaberg forest in order to get to the coal underneath, all in an effort to phase out nuclear and expand solar and wind. The good news is that I think that people still care about nature enough for these facts to matter. We saw last year in South Korea a citizens' jury deliberated for several months weighing these different issues. They had to decide whether they were going to phase out nuclear or keep it and expand it. They started out 40% in favor of expanding nuclear, but after several months and considering these issues, they ended up voting 60% to expand nuclear. A similar phenomenon just happened last week in Arizona. The voters had a ballot initiative to vote on whether or not to continue with nuclear or to phase it out and try to replace it with natural gas and solar. They ended up rejecting it 70-30. And even here in Europe, we saw the Netherlands is one of the first countries in recent memory to actually announce, as they did last week, that they're going to start to increase their reliance on nuclear power in recognition that there's just no way they can generate significant amounts of energy enough from solar and wind to meet their climate targets. I think it's natural that those of us that became very concerned about climate change, such a big environmental issue, would gravitate towards really romantic solutions like harmonizing human civilization with the natural world using renewable energies. But I think it's also understandable that as the facts have come in, that many of us have started to question our prior beliefs and change our minds. For me, the question now is, now that we know that renewables can't save the planet, are we going to keep letting them destroy it? Thank you very much.
Switzerland, question mark, WTF. Alright, so I called my grandmother up and I was like, Grandma, what do you think WTF means? And she was like, oh, well, someone at Bridge told me it means, wow, that's fun. I was like, that is exactly what it means. So I'm not going to explain that to my grandmother. But over time, I've come to realize that I think the world would be a happier place if more people thought WTF. If more people were like my grandmother and thought, wow, that's fun. Because in 2012, I left my corporate job at Procter & Gamble to teach people about the value of humor. I've worked with more than 35,000 people at more than 250 organizations on how to be more productive, less stressed, and happier using humor. And when people hear what it is that I do, they are a little bit skeptical. Because no one thinks of humor as a bad thing. Is there anyone here that doesn't like to laugh? Anyone that's like, no, I hate feeling joy in my body? No, right? People think of humor as a nice to have. Oh, if I enjoyed my work more, or if I had some fun, it would be great. But if not, oh well. The reality is that humor is a must-have. In today's overworked, underappreciated, stress-filled, sleep-deprived culture, humor is a necessity. Because humor gets people to listen, it increases long-term memory retention, and it understanding, aids in learning, and helps communicate messages. It also improves group cohesiveness, reduces status differentials, diffuses conflict, builds trust, and brings people closer together. It does these things, and this stuff, and on and on and on. And it's all backed by research, case studies, and real-world examples. And these are some impressive benefits, right? Humor can help you to look better, live longer, and make it rain, right? Because people who use humor are paid more. And anyone can learn these benefits, right? Because when I talk to people about humor or comedy, sometimes they're intimidated. That event that I went to in Switzerland a couple years ago that made my grandmother say WTF, it was to speak at a conference, and one of the other speakers at that conference was this gentleman. His name is Kevin Richardson. He's also known as the Lion Whisperer. If you've ever seen that YouTube video of a lion hugging a dude, that's this guy. He lives in South Africa. He raises lions from when they're really young, and they treat him as one of the pride. He's basically the human version of Rafiki from The Lion King. But Kevin and I were talking before the event, and he found out that I did stand-up comedy, and he was like, I could never do that. It's too scary. I was like, but you live with lions, right? As if telling a joke is somehow scarier than living with lions. But so many people have this perception as if the ability to make people laugh is somehow encoded in our DNA. But the reality is that humor is a skill. And if it's a skill, that means we can learn it. Because I am someone who has had to learn how to use humor. Because I've done over 1,000 shows as a stand-up comedian, improviser, storyteller, spoken word artist. I've spoken or performed in all 50 states and 18 countries and on one planet. I have fans in more than 150 countries based on people who have accidentally come to my website. I've been called hilarious and smart, at least that's what my mom says. Right? And I've been seen on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart in the audience. I recently went to my high school reunion, though, and when people found out that I did stand-up comedy, they said, but you're not funny. And in some ways, they're right, because I would tell you that this is not the face of funny. Right? There is a lot that's funny about this picture. None of it is intentional. Right? I have the blonde tips up top like I wanted to be in a boy band. Right? The theme was Into a Dream. I am no one's dream. This picture, because growing up, I was never the life of the party or the class clown. My senior year, my senior superlative, I was voted teacher's pet. And this is going to surprise many of you, but it's because I am a nerd. And if you're wondering what type of nerd, the answer is yes. Computer, math, sci-fi, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars, Star Trek, Starbucks, all of them. But most specifically, I'm an engineer. I went to The Ohio State University, got a degree in computer science and engineering. And after I graduated, I started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager. And that's what people expected me to do. Because based on my personality assessment, that's what it suggests I should be. It's a computer science engineer. But I have learned that we're not a personality assessment. Because my assessment is I'm a type A, blue square, conscientious, INTJ with the sign of Aquarius. That means I'm an ambitious, stubborn introvert who likes long walks on the beach. But I've learned we're not our personality assessments. They might give us insight into our behavior or tell us what motivates us or tell us which Disney princess we would be, Pocahontas. But they don't define us. Instead, we are defined by our actions. So I started doing comedy in college. My best friend there in the middle wanted to start an improv comedy group. He needed people and forced me to join. And as you can probably tell from this picture, we were not very good. At least to start out, we had no idea what we were doing. We watched Newsline in anyway and tried to repeat what we saw. And what I didn't have in comedy skill, I made up in comedy project management. I was like, all right, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it for real. We're going to practice 3 times a week. We're going to have a business meeting every Monday. And we're going to go back and watch our shows as if it was game day. And over the course of 2 years, we got better. We went from performing in the basements of residence halls to performing twice a week at a theater on campus, never really learning how to take a picture. But that's how I learned the skill of humor was through practice and repetition. And anyone can do these things. And you don't have to become a professional comedian to use comedy, but we can learn from the professional. For example, from stand-up, we can learn about how to share your point of view. Because Louis C.K. has a very specific way of seeing the world, which is different than Ellen DeGeneres, which is different than Tig Notaro, Dave Chappelle, or Chris Rock. Everyone has their own perspective. Like some people tell me that I kind of look like woman told me once, she was like, I think you look like Justin Timberlake, but from here to here. Right? And we're gonna ignore the guy that told me I look like Clay Hagen, right? Just completely, right? Everyone has their own perspective. And we can use that perspective as a way to connect with other people, right? We can use it to say, oh, we're alike. Like, how many people here like dessert? People love dessert. Like, I love desserts. I am obsessed with milkshakes. They're the most efficient form of dessert, right? Because the deliciousness of ice cream in an easy-to-consume form. Right? But I don't understand mint chocolate. I don't know if we have any mint chocolate. I don't understand mint chocolate because I've never been eating chocolate and been like, you know what would go great with this? Toothpaste. Right? We can share a perspective as a way to connect. We can also share a perspective as a way to make a point. Because I will tell you that I have always understood computers much more than I understand humans. Because when something goes wrong with the computer, you get an error message. When something goes wrong with a human, you get feelings. And things would be so much easier if humans came with error messages, wouldn't they? Like, say you're overworked, overwhelmed, a little bit stressed out, it would just pop up, warning, system overload. Please restart by taking a nap. Right? Because we all know naps are the human version of just turn it off and then turn it back on again. Some error messages you wouldn't even have to change. Like, say you're out flirting with a waitress, she's not really feeling it, it would just pop up, error. Unable to establish connection to server. Things would be so much easier. But the reality is that humans aren't computers, no matter how adorable they are, and they pretend to be. Because we as humans not only have to manage time, we have to manage energy. Because it doesn't matter how much time we have if we never have the energy to do anything with it. From improv, we can learn how we can explore and heighten a point of view. Because the fundamental mindset of improvisation is yes and. It's how improvisers at UCB, Second City, and Comedy Sports make things up off the top of their head. And we can use that same thing, take what they do, accept and build, explore and heighten and say if this is true, what else is true? Because it took me going to the state of Florida to realize that the rapper Flow Rider got his name from his home state of Florida and he put a space in it. Right? That blew my mind. It's like, that is incredible. We can say, if this is true, what else could be true? We could say, you know what, I think there should be a Hispanic factory in Dover that goes by Delaware. Or like, there could be a female internet detective in Biloxi who goes by Mrs. IP PI. And if this is true, what else is true? And we can use yes and to create humor. We can also use yes and as a way to connect with other people. We can think of that stereotypical small talk conversation where people are like, how about this weather? We can say yes, and if you weren't at this event right now, how would you be out enjoying the weather? And we can turn an awkward conversation into something that's more meaningful, where you learn about the person. Where it's like, oh, with beautiful weather, I go outside, or I go hiking or swimming, or if you're me, you stay inside because you're very pale. Right? I like to use SPF building. It's the best protection, right? We learn about people through yes and. We can also use a yes and mindset to have more fun. Because the reality is that the average person will work 90,000 hours in their lifetime. 90,000 hours. That's the entire length, the entire discography of Netflix. That is a lot of time. And we can say, yes, I'm going to work 90,000 hours, and I might as well enjoy it. Between my junior and senior year of high school, I worked in a factory, and I will tell you it was not a very exciting job. And at the time, I thought that I might in the future want to become an international hip-hop superstar. So to pass the time, I would think of rhymes in my head, and then I'd write them down in a notebook a little bit later. And I recently found one of those notebooks and discovered why I never became a hip-hop superstar. Because one of the rhymes was hydrogen plus oxygen 2, bonded together with covalent glue. What do you get? Just a thing called water. Yeah, it's steaming up and it's only getting hotter. There's a reason why I never became a hip-hop superstar, right? But it still helped me to pass the time, to create humor, to create fun. And finally, from sketch, we can learn about the importance of commitment to performance. Because the characters from Saturday Night Live, Key and Peele, Monty Python, they're so enjoyable because the actors are committed to the performance and they're confident in their presentation. Because it's kind of like dating, right? People tell you that they want to date someone who is confident, right? A couple years ago, I was hanging out with some friends at a bar, and I saw this beautiful girl at the bar, and they're like, oh, you should go and talk to her. And I was like, I can't do that. And they're like, why not? And I was like, I don't have game. And they're like, you don't need game, you just need confidence. But But what they don't tell you is that they want that confidence in certain areas. Because no woman wants a man who's confident in math. And that's what I got. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try math pickup line. So I went up to the girl and I was like, hey, girl, are you a vertical asymptote? Because your beauty has no limits. She was like, what did you just say? So I tried again. I was like, hey, girl, are you opposite over hypotenuse? Because you're making me want to sin. She was like, I think you should probably leave. Right, so I left, right? But then a few hours later, I was like, oh, what I should have said was, hey, girl, you're way above average, don't be mean. And has that ever happened to you where you thought of something 4 hours after the event? That's actually a good thing. It's something called staircase width. The idea of oh, this moment happens here, and then you think of this idea in a staircase. And that's a good sign because that means you have comedic instinct. And through practice and repetition, you can shorten the time that it takes to have that ha-ha moment from being 4 hours later to only 3 hours later to only 2 to 10 minutes to then happening in the moment. Because reflection on the past leads to action in the future. And so we become more comfortable, more confident using humor the more that we actually do it. It's like Amy Cuddy says, fake it until you become it. Now I know there's a couple of people that are like, all right, Justin Timberlake guys, what if I'm not funny? Well, the truth is, if you have ever made someone laugh, even if it's because you tripped up the steps while going up the steps, you can still use humor. But even if you're not ready to try creating humor, you can still benefit from humor by being a shepherd of humor. Right? You can share quotations out. You can share a TED Talk that you enjoyed. Or you can use images in your presentations. Because I will tell you, I did not take this picture. I did not go to Sri Lanka. I do not know this shepherd or any of these goats. Instead, I found it on Flickr under a Creative Commons license and shared it with all of you because I enjoyed it. Right? So we can do that. But even if you're not ready to create humor and you don't think that you can find something interesting on the internet, you can still use humor if you know how to smile. Because when we see someone else smile, we are primed to mirror that behavior with mirror neurons in our brain. And when we smile and they smile, we create a human connection. Other people are like, but what if no one laughs? What if I try humor and there's an awkward silence? Well, it's really only awkward if you spend time on it, if you dwell on it. The reality is that no one has ever been fired because of a bad joke. An inappropriate one, maybe, but not a bad joke. Because a bad joke is something like, I once had to miss class because of hypothermia. I was too cool for school. That's a bad joke. Right? An inappropriate joke is one that has an inappropriate subject, has an inappropriate target, or comes at an inappropriate time. But as long as we are positive and inclusive, we'll be okay. Because then if no one laughs at our joke, it's just now a positive and inclusive statement. Finally, people are like, but what if no one takes me seriously? What if people think of me as a jester or a clown? Well, if you're going to use humor at work, recognize that humor doesn't replace the work, right? Humor is like the salt of a meal. You wouldn't want to eat an entire meal of salt, would you? Because that would make you a horse. Do you want to be a horse? I say nay. Okay, but no, you can still use humor. As long as you're making it more productive, managers actually want it because they know that you're going to be more engaged and get better results. But let's say you work for an organization that says no fun whatsoever. The reality is that no one can control how you think. No one can prevent you from listening to a comedy podcast on your way home from work so that you relieve stress and show up more present for your family.